The grand mansion of billionaire businessman Richard Alastair stood like a palace over the rolling green hills. Its golden gates opened only for the powerful and the privileged, and inside, everything was touched by wealth, marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and art worth millions hanging on the walls. Yet, despite all the luxury, the house felt cold. It was quiet except for the occasional sound of a child's cry echoing through the halls. That cry belonged to little Emily Alastair, Richard's 6-year-old daughter, who had become known among the staff for one thing: she hated every nanny her father hired. In the past 2 years, 15 nannies had come and gone. Some quit within a week, others left in tears after being scratched, bitten, or locked out of her room. Emily didn't talk to anyone except her teddy bear, and no matter how kind the nannies tried to be, she would push them away. Her father, a man who built his empire from nothing, couldn't understand why his daughter behaved that way. He was a millionaire who could solve any business problem, but when it came to his child, he felt powerless. Richard stood by the tall window of his office one morning, watching the rain fall over the garden. His secretary came in nervously and said, "Sir, the new maid you hired has arrived." Richard sighed deeply, his eyes tired. "Another one. I've lost count," he muttered, straightening his tie. "Send her in." The door opened, and a young woman walked in, clutching a small bag. She looked nervous but determined. Her clothes were simple, a plain blue blouse, worn jeans, and shoes that had clearly seen better days. "Good morning, sir," she said softly. "My name's Clara." Richard studied her for a moment. She didn't look like the others he had hired before, no fancy degrees, no polished accent, no air of entitlement. She looked humble. "Clara," he said, leaning back in his chair. "You're here for the nanny position?" "Yes, sir." "I know I may not look qualified," she admitted, "but I love children. And I really need this job." Something about her honesty struck him. He nodded slowly. "Very well. You'll start today. But I'll warn you, my daughter isn't easy to handle." Clara smiled faintly. "Children act out when they're hurting, sir. Maybe she just needs someone to listen." Richard didn't respond, but there was a flicker of hope in his eyes. He watched as Clara was led upstairs to meet Emily. When Clara entered the child's room, it was like walking into a tiny kingdom of loneliness. Toys were scattered everywhere, drawings hung crookedly on the walls, and in the corner sat a little girl with golden curls, holding her teddy bear tightly. Clara took a slow breath. "Hi, Emily," she said softly. "My name's Clara. Your daddy asked me to spend some time with you today." The girl didn't answer. Instead, she turned her face away and muttered, "Go away. You'll leave me too." Clara knelt down beside her, keeping a gentle distance. "You know, I might. But not until I get to know you first." Emily glanced at her with suspicion. Her big blue eyes were full of pain. "Everyone leaves," she whispered. "Because I'm bad." Clara's heart broke at those words. "No, sweetheart," she said gently. "You're not bad. You're just sad." Emily frowned, gripping her teddy bear tighter. "You'll say that now. But when I scratch you, you'll run away like all of them." Clara smiled calmly. "Then I guess I'll just have to wear long sleeves," she said playfully. That made Emily pause. No one had ever answered her like that. No one had dared to joke with her. She stared at Clara for a long moment, as if trying to decide whether she was real. Then she turned away and whispered, "You're weird." Clara chuckled. "That's okay. Weird people make the best friends." Something in that simple exchange planted a seed in Emily's heart. Over the next few hours, Clara didn't try to force her to talk. She simply stayed near, folding laundry, humming songs, and letting the little girl watch her quietly. Slowly, Emily's walls began to lower. That evening, when Richard came home, he was shocked to hear laughter echoing through the hallway. He stopped in disbelief. It was Emily's voice, laughing, truly laughing, for the first time in months. He walked toward the sound and froze in the doorway. There was his daughter, sitting on the floor surrounded by crayons, coloring next to Clara. The sight almost made him emotional. Emily looked up and said, "Daddy, look." Clara drew a rainbow. Richard blinked in surprise. You called her by her name." Emily nodded proudly, showing him her drawing. Richard looked at Clara, who smiled politely. She's very talented, Clara said. That night, after putting Emily to bed, Richard found himself sitting alone, thinking about the strange connection between the new maid and his daughter. He had hired countless professionals, child psychologists, trained nannies, even a therapist, but none had reached Emily's heart. Yet this young woman with nothing but kindness had managed to do what no one else could. The next morning, Richard overheard something that made his heart twist. He stood outside Emily's room and listened as Clara spoke softly to her. "Why don't you let your daddy hug you sometimes?" she asked gently. Emily's voice trembled. "Because he'll go away too. Like Mommy did." Richard froze. He had never realized how deeply his daughter's mother's death had scarred her. Tears welled in his eyes as he realized he had been too busy with work, too afraid of his own grief to notice hers. Days passed, and Clara became part of the household. Emily followed her everywhere, into the kitchen, the garden, even when Clara cleaned. The maids whispered among themselves, amazed. "The little princess actually likes her," one said in disbelief. "She scratched the last nanny so bad she had to get a bandage." But one morning, Richard walked into the living room and saw something that made him stop in his tracks. Emily had climbed onto Clara's lap, her tiny arms wrapped around the maid's neck. Clara looked surprised but didn't move. Then, to Richard's utter shock, Emily kissed Clara softly on the cheek. Richard's jaw dropped. "No way," he whispered. Emily turned and smiled shyly at her father. "Daddy, Clara's my friend. She doesn't yell. She listens." Richard blinked, overcome with emotion. He felt something stir inside him, gratitude, awe, maybe even guilt for not being there sooner. That evening, he called Clara into his study. "I don't know what kind of magic you've done," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But you've given me back my daughter." Clara shook her head humbly. "No, sir. She just needed love. And someone to stay." Richard smiled for the first time in weeks. "Then stay. Please. I'll make sure you're treated well. You've done more for this house than anyone ever has." As she left the study, Clara's eyes welled with tears. She had lost everything once, her parents, her home, her dignity, but now, for the first time in years, she felt she belonged somewhere. Little did she know, this was only the beginning. The walls of wealth and pain in that mansion were about to crumble, revealing secrets that would change all their lives forever. And as for Richard, he had no idea that the woman who just saved his daughter's heart would soon steal his own.